So what's going on with Will Riley?
You are Locked On Illini, your daily podcast on the Illinois Fighting Illini. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Illini, a special holiday week. It might be the holidays, but I'll still have content for you guys every single day. So make sure you hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. My name is Sunny Verma. You can find me on all your favorite audio platforms, on all the social medias. Again, just do a quick search for Locked On Illini. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Sunday, we saw the Illini barely squeeze by the Missouri Tigers with an 80-77 victory, which quite honestly was just not a fun basketball game to watch. The officiating for the second game in a row became the storyline of that game. I believe there's 44 fouls called, and it just wasn't a fun game either way. Illinois was able to prevail in large part, surprisingly, due to their free throw shooting. And again, I don't say that very often, especially with the Brad Underwood basketball team. It was their 22 for 23 free throw shooting, which was one of the main reasons they were able to come out on the positive side of that battle yesterday. Now, Missouri tried to play very physical. They really tried to push around Illinois, which I suspected last week maybe you could do. But Illinois, despite never really being able to put the foot to the throat, despite having multiple chances with double-digit leads, they could never really, stretch it out and just win the game until the very, very end. It seemed like every time Illinois made a run, Missouri followed up with a run of their own, and they just kind of went back and forth, vice versa, with dozens of whistles in between. But today, I wanted to kind of reflect, and I'm going to be doing that a lot this week. Obviously, we don't have another basketball game until Sunday against Chicago State, so we have some time to kind of just discuss the season in general, okay? I mean, Chicago State is an out-of-conference game, but for the most part, the out-of-conference schedule is done. We do have Duke in February, so I was going to invite guests this week to just kind of talk about what we like about this Illinois season thus far and some things that we don't like. And so today, I kind of wanted to highlight what I consider the biggest enigma, and that's freshman Will Riley. Will Riley, of course, if you just take a step back, and I told you his seasonal averages right now, he's averaging 13.5 points per game, 4.2 rebounds per game, assist and a half, and shooting almost 43% from the field. Now, if you had told us that in the preseason, before the season started, that Will Riley would be averaging 13.5, 4 and 1.5 on 43% shooting, for the most part, we would take that. Again, he's a freshman, right? He's turned 18 years old. He reclassified. I mean, he's an older reclassification player, but regardless, 13.5 points for a freshman here at Illinois is very, very impressive. But those of us who are Illinois fans know it hasn't necessarily been too much success as of late. Will Riley, even against Missouri, shot 1 for 8. Against Tennessee, the game before, in 20 minutes, he shot 1 for 9. That means in the last 3 games, Will has shot 4 for 21 from the field, if I'm doing my math. In fact, if we're going to be real about it, I'm taking a look at his game log right now. The last day that Will Riley had a good shooting day was November 23rd. Depending on when you're listening to this on audio or watching on YouTube, that was a month ago. A month ago is when Will Riley shot 7 for 11. Ever since then, he's followed that up with 4 for 11, 2 for 9, 4 for 12, 2 for 4, 1 for 9, and 1 for 8. Now, early in the season, there was talk about, how can we get Will Riley more minutes, and should he be in the starting lineup? Why isn't he in the starting lineup? A guy who was a top 15 national prospect, the highest that Illinois has had in a very, very long time. Why isn't he given more minutes, especially with the struggles with some of the guys ahead of him? And I mean, that talk is obviously tempered down, not just because of Will Riley's struggles as of late, but Trey White has been one of our most steady leaders for the last couple of games now and kind of established himself, I think, in that starting small forward role. Ben Hummerkaus, of course, is still struggling. He was 1 for 3, I believe, against Missouri. And again, the defensive struggles are there, at least for the common fan. I've talked about this before. I kind of see what Brad Underwood is doing with Ben on the defensive end, and I can see why he doesn't necessarily think Ben is struggling as much as us fans tend to do. But in order for this team to reach its potential this season, we were counting on Will Riley to be the Marcus Domask to Kasparis's Terrence Shannon Jr. to kind of equate it from last year's team. And right now, it just is not working out. Not only from the field, but he's not shooting three-pointers all that well. Luckily, right now, his only saving grace is that free throw line. But as the players coach that he is, someone from the media asked Brad about Will Riley and his struggles in the post-game press conference, and this is what Brad Underwood had to say. Underwood told him to keep shooting. If you ever hesitate again, I will be disappointed. Go home, and when you come back, they're going to go in. And honestly, that's the mantra, that's the belief that maybe it's just meathead-ish of me. But, the fact that Brad continues to believe in his guys. Now, I know on some level it's frustrating because when he's talking to Ben Hummerkaus, for me, it's different because Ben's been in college for a very long time. He's one of the oldest players on this basketball team. He's one of the older players in college basketball in general. The question with Ben isn't, is he a good basketball player? No, for us, we're just trying to figure out whether his skill set is going to adjust to this level or if it just unfortunately peaked at the lower levels. That's what we're trying to figure out right now, 11 games in. With Will Riley, we know he's a fantastic basketball player. We know, he's going to play in the NBA. Now, let's be honest, his recent struggles actually have him falling out of first-round mock drafts, which obviously is not an ideal scenario, which I've talked about this before. I do think the development of Will is going to be huge for the staff in terms of possibly bringing on future star players, even a guy like Alex Costanza, who is kind of like a version of Will Riley, maybe a bigger Will Riley. He's going to take a look at Will's production on this Illinois team as a freshman, just like many other players will do down the road, and see whether or not, Illinois is a place that can develop talent. But back to Will. Will's just one of those players where I've been looking at, he's still taking these wide open three-pointers. And, Brad talked about it in that exact quote, and that quote hit me hard because this is why we have this belief in Will. Will's a scorer. Will is undoubtedly, to me, the best scorer on this basketball team, and one of the best scorers this league is going to see should he decide to stay next year. He just needs a little time to develop. It was a couple of games ago where a reporter had asked Brad about the early game success that he's had. And Brad simply said, Brad talked about how he hated having those little cookie cutter games in the earlier part in the season because some of these players, they just load up their numbers and the numbers look very inflated because, quite honestly, they're playing against teams that they're clearly superior to. But when the going gets tough and the Big Ten, arguably the best league in the world, starts and the competition levels up, well, then all of a sudden there's a huge adjustment period. And obviously that's what's going on with Will. He was 4 for 12 in his first Big Ten game against Northwestern, 2 for 4, a slower, only 15 minutes against Wisconsin. But obviously, Will's going to be a huge guy that we're going to need once the conference season actually starts. Luckily, Will is producing rebound-wise. He's not a guy who just stands and waits for his shot, which is what I kind of like him about more than I like, let's say, Ben, who Ben just for some reason isn't able to grab rebounds, whereas Will genuinely does try. Now, Will's frame is not quite big enough where he's a great defensive player yet. But, still, like with his athleticism, I think he has the potential to continue to prove on that area moving forward. But the same way Brad hasn't really given up hope on Will, I think it's a little early. I know the frustrations are there. As I talked about in the post game against Missouri, and there's about over 100 of you that joined me for that post game. I do that live after every single basketball and football game. So if you're not subscribed already, make sure you are. I just talked about how, Kasparis at some point is going to hit his rookie wall. And so I do have my questions on whether Will Riley simply hit his, and it just happens to be early. It happened in the month of November, whereas usually for freshmen, it starts in December or January or February even. Hopefully that's all it is. Hopefully this is just one of those situations where Will needs time to adjust. And, my hope is that Chicago State is going to provide the perfect opportunity to run Will out there for 25 minutes and just give him the ball and get his confidence back. Because I genuinely believe that Will is just one of those players who needs to see the ball go through the hoop. He hasn't seen much of that lately. And again, when you have such a young player, you just don't want to get that in your head. I think if Will can have a big game against Chicago State, I hope we can give KJ some time off, maybe play him 15, 20 minutes max, because that kid's just been shouldering a load this early in the season that he shouldn't have to. He's been by far our best player. I'm hoping that he can hand over some of that responsibility over to Will, and Will can run with him because the kid's just far too talented. He got as high up as I believe number 9 in some of the mock drafts that I took a look at during the season, and he's fallen off of them now, but the talent is there. And if this Illinois team is to reach the potential that we want it to reach, well, Will Riley's going to have to reach his potential. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for. And Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, so Illinois does have one more game against Chicago State remaining on Sunday. And then, of course, we have another battle at Madison Square Garden against Duke in February. But for the most part, the out-of-conference schedule for Illinois is done. It's time to focus on Big Ten play and our competitors in the Big Ten Conference. And for that, I'll actually be starting a new weekly series. I think we plan on doing it every Monday, whereas I'll be bringing on JR from the Big Ten Huddle. JR, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Sunny.
And so JR and I, this week it's just going to be him giving us his power rankings. But essentially every Monday morning, JR and I are going to put together our power rankings 1 through 18, and then we'll go back and forth with whatever might be the biggest stories of the week and maybe previewing whatever opponents that Illinois has lined up over the next week. And so, Jared, thanks for agreeing to that.
Yeah, man. Me and Kent, Casual Big Ten, we do our power rankings every Monday morning. We do a show where we talk about them and everything, and other stuff gets in there as well. So we're used to doing this, and it's always a good time talking about it and making a fan base or two mad.
Exactly. I'm sure that's going to start with this episode right here. JR, I figure I have not seen your list this week. Again, starting next week, we'll collab, but let's just start from the bottom. And then, maybe slowly just go on your way up. And then if there's a name that surprises me, I'll kind of stop you there and ask you a little bit about it.
All right, I'll just get going. And if you have one that surprises you, you let me know. So bottom of it all, I have Minnesota 18th, USC 17th, Rutgers I have 16th, Washington 15th, Indiana 14th.
Okay, let's stop right there. No, we're going to stop right there. This is good. Indiana, the team that was projected number 2, I think, in the conference in the preseason poll, you have at 14. And you know what, JR? I don't think you're that far off. I mean, you're talking about one of the ultimate, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, there was so much hype coming into the Hoosiers. And I've talked about this on Locked On Illini constantly. I've watched almost every single game of theirs. And everything that we knew about them beforehand coming into the season, aka coaching, still rings true. And so I'm curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, they brought in a lot of really good players, and we've talked about it on the Big Ten Huddle before, is like they have the talent to be a top contender team in the Big Ten, but for whatever reason, Mike Woodson just does not know how to get guards to play consistently. And it's a travesty with what he's done with Luke Goody so far this year as well, as I know a lot of Illinois fans are familiar with. He's not been shooting well from 3 this year, and you just had a game where halfway through the second half, Chattanooga was in that game with Indiana. So as far as I'm concerned, I can't move Indiana up. Indiana has lost games that they shouldn't have lost, and now they beat South Carolina, but that's still like the worst team in the SEC, or one of the worst teams in the SEC. Congratulations. But for the most part, I'm not super impressed in their wins, and in some of these losses, there's not really a whole lot of redeeming qualities. Like you look at, and we'll talk about them later on, you look at Illinois and their loss to Tennessee, there's a lot of redeeming stuff in there. Illinois fans left angry, I get that, but there was a lot of redeeming stuff in there. There's not a whole lot of redeeming stuff when you're getting blown out by Louisville and Gonzaga. You come back, you beat Providence, good for you, but it's a combination of they don't play a very tough schedule, and the really weak teams that they're playing right now, their players are not balling out like they should be, and a lot of these players are still having some of the same issues that they had last year. Malik Renew still fouls. Trey Galloway is still streaky, and some players have come in and looked worse than they were at their previous locations.
Yeah, so that's probably the first surprise so far. So we're at 14 now. Who else is next?
Yeah, so after Indiana, I have Iowa 13th, Northwestern 12th, Nebraska 11th, Wisconsin 10th, and getting into the top half now, Michigan 9th. I'm a little bit lower on them than most other people. A lot of people have Michigan a little bit higher than that. And then Ohio State 8th, Purdue 7th.
Let's talk about Ohio State a little bit. Obviously, you're an Ohio State fan, so I feel like I can have this conversation with you. Ohio State's a team that's kind of struggled somewhat this year, but they've got some pretty good wins, in particular the one that they just got on Saturday. What do you like and not like about the Buckeyes?
Yeah, the Buckeyes, that win against Kentucky was huge, right? That was a Mark Pope team that, a lot of people are feeling better about Mark Pope than they felt about John Calipari in a long time. And so this was a team in Kentucky that had momentum and things are going well. I believe Lamont Butler was the one that just had a really efficient game the other night. And then they come in here, Aaron Bradshaw comes back for Ohio State. I was really looking to see what that would be like with Aaron Bradshaw coming back and having the rim protection again. He comes back, he's not just a rim protector. He's hitting shots. He's very efficient from the floor. He didn't start in the game, and overall just looked a whole lot better. And the thing that I don't think a lot of people realize with Ohio State, because it's not been this way in the past, Ohio State has played a lot of really hard teams in their out-of-conference schedule. They played Pitt. They played Kentucky this past game. They played a number of other really good teams, Texas A&M. They have 6 quad 1 games already. that they've played. Now, they've lost 4 of those, but they only have 4 losses on the season. So you look at this Ohio State team, yeah, the loss to Auburn was really embarrassing. Yes, the loss to Maryland was really embarrassing, but they come back and they win by 20 against Kentucky. And so you're kind of like, well, who knows? Maybe it was just a fluke because Aaron Bradshaw wasn't there. We'll see what happens. So I moved them up a little bit in my power rankings, but if they lose, they'll move right back down again.
Okay, so Ohio State, and then who's next?
All right, after Ohio State, I have Purdue 7.
Okay, all right, so we're going to stop right there. Of course, I'm always curious because I wear an Illinois cap on my head, and I run two Illinois YouTube shows, so I can be accused of having some sort of bias. But Purdue at number 7, I mean, I feel like that might even be a little low for me. Tell me what you obviously don't like about Purdue.
Yeah, I mean, Purdue honestly is kind of in the same boat with Ohio State right now. Not a lot of Purdue fans will want to admit it, but they've played 7 quad 1 games. So they are also a team that's had a very tough schedule, and I give props to a team that's played a very tough schedule. But you look at those games and they got blown out by Penn State, which is a quad 1 game. They got blown out by Penn State. They got blown out by Marquette. Now, it wasn't Ohio State bad where it's like 30 points in the game, but you look at that Auburn game, they got blown out in that one too. It was nearly 20 points in that game. So, I mean, they're doing a good job of keeping it close, but the thing that not a lot of people want to say is that Purdue and Ohio State are really more similar than people want to admit this season. They don't have a 5. They do not have a 5. And Trey Kaufman-Wren is trying to play the 5, and I give him all the credit in the world for trying to play the 5, but the dude is just a turnstile down there at the 5. He's a good offensive player. He can play the 5 on offense, but on defense, he just can't do it. He's not big enough. He doesn't have the size, and they're hurting without Zach Edey right now, and without Daniel Jacobson as well. He could have been the piece for them. And they can get Will Berg to come along, but Wilberg just fouls too much, and so he stays in the game for 10 minutes tops. And on the other side, you do have Braden Smith, who's very good, but you're also asking Braden Smith to be somebody that he's really not. I mean, he can be the guy who comes down the floor and hits the big shot every single time. We saw that against Maryland late in that game. He was able to do that, but you've needed him to do that against Penn State. You've needed him to do that against Auburn. You've needed him to do that against Marquette. And he just wasn't able to do it. Purdue is going to be a team that does very well at home this year because you got Mackey Arena, you got players that just play better in that environment. But they're going to struggle on the road this season. And they obviously have the coach that can get them higher in the rankings. And some people would say I'm probably being a little bit too harsh on them. But as far as I'm concerned, I haven't seen anything for Purdue to make me think they need to be above Penn State at this point. Penn State lost to Rutgers. That was bad. But Purdue's also lost some games by more than they should against teams that they should be closer with. Like I said, Auburn, Marquette, all those kind of teams.
So 2/3 of the conference down. Illinois still up in the air. We'll find out where Illinois stands right after this. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. Not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown or how many points each team will score. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, JR, we've gotten 2/3 of the way through. We got 6 teams left. I've got my eyes and ears open for Illinois. Let's see where they fall on your list. Who's number 6?
All right, number 6 for me is Penn State, just above Purdue. Number 5, Maryland. Derek Queen and them boys, they're doing good.
So let's talk about Maryland real quick. Okay. I love Derek Queen.
Yeah, he's awesome.
I think he's my favorite player in this conference that doesn't wear a blue and orange uniform. He's just I talked about this before on the show. He reminds me of what like dominant Big Ten bigs used to play like. And I don't know. I'm not really in mock draft season outside, keeping tabs on Kasparis and Will O'Reilly. So I don't know like how high Queen is supposed to be projected. But man, if he stays a second or even by some chance a third year in the Big Ten, like he's one of those guys who can end up being an all-timer.
Yeah, he's going to be having a great career if he stays. That's the thing. Can he stay, right? I mean, that NBA money is going to be very enticing to him, and he might get drafted higher after his freshman year because of his age and everything. You know how those scouts and guys in the front office like to get their hands on a young player so that way they can kind of mold him. I don't think it would really be the worst decision in the world. I feel like NBA is probably going to put you in a better situation strength and conditioning wise than Maryland. Not bashing Maryland, it's the NBA. But yeah, no, I like this Maryland team too. My biggest thing with them is that they really haven't played a ton of really tough teams. They've played 3 quad 1 games, but they're 1-2 in those quad 1 games. If you look at the metrics love them. I mean, they are like top 10, and Ken Palmer net, one of those two. Torvik is fond of them. Like, if you were to take an average of the like metrics, they would be number 1 in the Big Ten. But I just can't give a team number 1 in the Big Ten who has not played that tough a schedule, and really they have 7 quad 4 wins, and that makes up most of their wins so far. So I need to see a little bit more from them before I put them much higher, but I like what I've seen so far.
Okay, we got 4 left.
All right. Number 4 is Oregon. Number 3, UCLA. Number 2, Michigan State. And number 1, I do have Illinois.
Okay, and so that's not just because you're on the show that you put Illinois number 1.
Of course not.
Okay, so let's talk about the West Coast teams real quick. We don't have to stay very long with them. I was outside where Illinois was going to finish. Those two were the teams I was kind of looking forward to seeing where you had them at, because I still don't know how good they are. Like I want to see them really play the meat of what Big Ten schedule actually looks like. Right now, they're just like round robining, like playing each other. And like for me, it's like I don't have a feel on how they fit in with this league so far. So you have them at 3 and 4, which I think is fair. UCLA is ranked number 18 in the country right now. Oregon, I think, top 10 as well. So it's like, but so 3 and 4, which I think is about right. What are your thoughts on those two teams?
Yeah, UCLA, I liked what I've seen. I actually had him at one point number 1 in my power rankings actually just last week, because they were undefeated against quad 1 teams. And when you haven't taken a loss, and they hadn't played a ton of them, but they went to Oregon and won that game, and that was huge for them. They did fall to New Mexico, but then they beat Arizona as well. But the loss to North Carolina really was the one that was kind of the thing that put it over the edge, where it was like, all right, I can't keep you number 1. Like I can justify putting you number 1 when you're undefeated against quad 1 teams. And it was just a 2-point loss. It's not like it was a blowout or anything like that, but that kind of gives me the justification to say, all right, I have some freedom now to where I can kind of go with somebody else. Maybe I don't just look at resume, but I look at what team do I think is most talented? What team do I think has the most potential? If I look at this Big Ten right now, which team looks like they could make a run to the Elite Eight, to the Sweet 16 with the natural God-given ability they have? And that looks like Illinois to me out of anybody right now.
So, yeah, I mean, your top 2 are actually my top 2. If I was producing my own rankings, I'd have Illinois, Michigan State as well. This is Locked On Illini, so we're going to focus on Illinois. The viewers, the listeners here, they know what I think of Illinois, but let's get an outsider's perspective.
KJ's the truth. I mean, I was on here after which game was I on here after? I forget which one it was, but I was on here after one of your games talking about KJ and Avicic. Avicic is just such a natural piece to what KJ does, and his ability to get outside the arc and still be able to open up lanes for KJ to get to the basket. KJ is such a natural playmaker. His ball handling ability to create his own shot as well. He has that dog in him where if you need him late in the game just to come down and hit a shot for you, he can do it. He about won that Northwestern game all by himself, which, by the way, that Northwestern game, don't look now, that's a quad 1 game. So, I mean, Illinois, they're looking good. For me, just fix the inbounding issues. Like they played well enough to beat Tennessee. They should have beaten Tennessee. Just fix the inbounding issues because Brad has himself a really, really good team here. I was always critical of the defense last year. That was my main thing I was critical of. And Illinois still doesn't get force as many turnovers as I'd like. Still like to see more of that. But overall, they play some really good defense. They're long, and I think Brad has a good mixture of guys that he knows what he's going to do with. And I think the biggest thing about it, he has the flexibility to do different things. He can use Merez Johnson in different ways. He's got a first round talent, and Will Riley just sitting on the bench for him to just throw out there at any point in time and harass whatever team they're going up against. I love the pieces he has. I love the coach that Brad Underwood is. And at this point, until I see him go on a run where they're just not playing good basketball and Brad doesn't look like he knows what he's doing, which I don't anticipate to happen, but until that happens, I got to say, Illinois looks like the best team in the Big Ten to me.
Yeah, and if you really think about it, JR, like they're sitting here at 8-3, 1-1 in the conference, and 11 games in right now. You have KJ. Kasparis is becoming almost a household name in the college basketball world at this point, and he's elevated himself to not just all Big Ten talk, but now the national media is talking about him that he might have a chance to be an All-American of some sort by the end of the season. But in particular, over the past month, it's just been him. He almost has been carrying this team on his back. So for me, I love having them at number one. And you and I have talked about this before. I thought Illinois would struggle early in the season just because we're turning over so much of this roster. But on the same note, I was very optimistic of what this team would look like once the Big Ten season hits, because at that point, they'll have played one of the toughest out-of-conference schedules in the country. And, you just figure young players, the more time they have on the court with each other, they'll get better acclimated to not just each other, but, the college basketball game in itself. So my hopes is, my original prediction comes true in the sense where we're sitting here right now, 8-3, again, number one on your power rankings and, mine. And I don't think the team has really found itself yet. It's kind of winning because of KJ and just the general talent in the room. Once Will Riley figures it out, I talked about earlier on in this episode, in the first segment, I think he's 4 for his last 22. He's definitely hit that freshman wall a little bit early, but once he gets over that wall, hopefully Tomislav, finds his touch a little bit more. He needs to be a little bit more physical because the Big Ten Conference is a very physical conference. And so he's got to figure that part out. But there's just so many pieces here that if Illinois struggled early in the year, then I can be a little bit more concerned. But, you watched my post game after that Tennessee game. I felt like I was a man on an island in that chat. For me, I genuinely was more impressed with the future of this team after that game, seeing how we played, in my opinion, a top 2 team in the country, number 1 ranking wise, to the end. And again,
Yep.
We had the game, if not just for some silly plays by both Kasparis and just Brad Underwood just not being able to, as you say, diagram and inbounds play. So I like, again, bias, of course, but Illinois at number 1, I can't argue that.
Yeah, and part of it too is potential, right?
Sure.
Ben Hummerkaus, I'm not seeing exactly what I want to see from him. I mean, you've heard me talk about that. But I look at this team and I say, man, if Ben Hummerkaus starts hitting those threes like he's supposed to, if he starts rebounding better like he's supposed to, which I think he has it in him, he just has to get there and do it, right? If Will Riley can start being that weapon that you just throw out there and he just terrorizes the entire team, which he has that in him. He hasn't been showing it lately, but he has that in him. We know he does. And sometimes during this part of the season, mid to late December, it happens to teams, right? This kind of stuff happens where, maybe certain players go through a little bit of a lull, but guess what? You pick back up in January, football's kind of over. People are starting to pay more attention to basketball. I know at Illinois, it's basketball all the time there. Not to say that you guys neglect your football or anything like that, but it's basketball all the time there. So, but still, the national media, everything going on, it's going to ramp up, and I think Brad Underwood teams respond to the pressure. They respond to the ramping up. They are not teams that play scared. They are not teams that play afraid. And so when I look at the coach, when I look at the players who have been struggling and them playing better, I just love the potential of this team. And I say they can win the Big Ten this season. And I don't think there's a whole lot of teams that can win the Big Ten this season.
Well, that wraps up the first Power Rankings edition of the show. Hopefully, Illinois maintains its spot at number one on an every week basis. But JR, thank you so much for joining us. Can you let my audience know once again where they can find you?
Yep, the Big Ten Huddle. We won't have a whole lot of content this week as it's Christmas and everything like that. But we, like I said, we always have a Power Rankings episode where we kind of go through and explain it a little bit more. Kent, Casual Big Ten, he does his Power Rankings, so we have a good time, comparing ours and, giving each other a hard time. Last week he had Michigan up to 5th, and I was like, no way, dude. Can't have that with all those turnovers. So we like to give each other a hard time. And then we also got football stuff as well. So we're talking about the playoffs. We're talking about the transfer portal, all that good stuff. Sunday night is football. Monday morning, basketball. Tuesday night, football. And then Thursday night is basketball again.
All right, JR. Appreciate you having you on. We'll see you next Monday.
See you then.
And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Locked On Illini. If you haven't already, please make sure you hit that like button. You hit that subscribe button. We're getting so close to 1,700 subscribers. Amazing. Thank you on the audio side. If you haven't subscribed to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, whatever it is you listen to on the podcast side, please do so there as well. The audio listeners are so important to me. Again, I know it's holiday week, but we're not taking any days off here at Locked On Illini. So please send this to another Illini friend or an old group chat or roommates that you might have. All your continued support is absolutely appreciated. Until next time, ILL love you guys.